Good afternoon. My name is Margot Rayner from the Chartered Banker Institute, and today I am delighted to introduce best-selling author Kevin Murray, who will be discussing essential soft skills that will make you a better leader and manager. Kevin specialises in strategic communications, reputation management, and leadership coaching. He has almost 40 years' experience in communications, including appointments as Director of Communications of British Airways, Director of Corporate Affairs at the UK Atomic Energy Authority, and Chairman of the Public Relations Division of Chime Group, the global sport, entertainment and communications company. He is also author of The Language of Leaders and Communicate to Inspire, both shortlisted for the CMI Management Book of the Year Awards in 2013 and 2014 respectively. The links to purchase these books are available in the attachment section of this webcast. If you have any questions during the presentation, please use the online function to submit these, and Kevin will do his best to answer as many as possible at the end. I will now hand you over to Kevin.
Thank you, Margot, and good afternoon, everybody. I want to talk today about why I really believe that the word soft skills should be banned, on the basis that soft skills are actually just about the most important thing that you as a manager and your organization, all the companies in Britain and we as a nation need to do a great deal more about improving to help to engineer better performing companies and to create wealth. And so the idea that these are soft skills I think is absurd, because they're the most important skills as a leader that you can possibly have. I've done so much research now on what motivates people and how leaders can and should be more inspiring. And I'm utterly convinced that people, the job of a leader is to give people a sense of purpose. And when people have a sense of purpose, they perform much, much better. And I'm going to prove this to you. Those people are healthier, happier, they're more productive. And so not only you as a leader and your organization win, but they win as well. But the key thing to remember throughout this chat is that a sense of purpose is derived from three different things. It's derived from purpose, it's derived from values, and it's derived from goals. And those three things working together are what give people a strong sense of purpose and higher levels of motivation and greater performance. And so the role of the leader is to deliver all three of those things. And that's what delivers culture in an organization. So what is the secret sauce that makes a leader truly inspiring? And over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I'm going to share with you what I've learned from doing 130 CEO interviews and research that I've done among, in total now, something like 3,000 leaders and over 6,000 employees. So it isn't just my opinion. This is now based in science and based in considerable research. And I'm going to share with you things that will enable you to be a much more inspiring leader and able to create more value in the organization that you belong and among the team that you lead. But first I want to go back a bit and just talk a little bit about an incident that happened to me when I was Director of Communications for British Airways. Now, many of you will be very aware of the whole problem that BA has recently undergone with the IT failure that caused them so much problems. And it seems that British Airways is never out of the news. But for this story, I'm going back something like 20 years to the time when I had to communicate the launch of the new tail fins at British Airways. You may remember this brief period in the airline's history. I didn't design them, but I was responsible for trying to communicate it. And that was a considerable challenge. Some of you may remember Maggie Thatcher dropping her handkerchief on the tail fin of one of the planes, causing global news, which I had to deal with. But in fact, this behind this was one of the worst things that ever happened to me as a leader, because the rebrand was part of a major strategic change for British Airways, which was about restructuring the company and cutting £1 billion of costs out of the business. The unions, of course, didn't like the management plans, and they were threatening strikes all over the airline, from baggage handlers to pilots to cabin crew. And on one particular occasion, the cabin crew were about to go on strike. And in order to try to prevent the strike, prevent all the passengers being inconvenienced, the management sent to these cabin crew a letter saying, if you go on strike, we will sack you and we will sue you. And the reason that they felt they could do this was because they could identify the costs that they could ascribe to a particular member of the cabin crew if she failed to turn up for work. But of course, the unions were at the same time saying to the cabin crew, if you don't go on strike, we will tar and feather you. And within a matter of a day or so, one cabin crew member had gone to her doctor and had been given a sick certificate. And before you knew it, 90% of the cabin crew had sick certificates. And the only problem that the airline had was that on the sick certificate it said, you can have 12 days off. So somehow British Airways managed to turn a 3-day strike into a 12-day sickie by 90% of the cabin crew and cost the airline £125 million. So this had a massive effect on me, this whole experience of treating people inhumanely. And I fell out with the then CEO, who fired me, and who then was fired himself less than a year later. But it left me with a big question that I carried with me for 16 years. And that question was, why do smart leaders fail? There's no doubt in my mind this was the right strategy, but the leadership had failed completely to take all the staff with them on this journey of change. And because of it, they had massive resistance to the change, and ultimately huge and damaging, possibly lifelong costs that still bug the airline. And the whole thing here is the emotional state that leaders induced among their own people. And I often wonder whether everyone really understands what an emotion actually is. And the definition of emotion is that it's defined as a state of feeling, of course, but that state of feeling results in physical and psychological changes. And it is those both physical and psychological changes that influence thought and behavior. And it's this issue of the physical changes that I don't believe we as leaders are aware of enough. Because what I'm really clear about is that in our brains, when we are going through this kind of emotional state, our brains are being pumped with all sorts of neurochemicals. And you get positive neurochemicals like oxytocin and harmful ones like cortisol, which we have no control over. These are pumped into our brains, and over the long term can have very, very damaging effects indeed on how we see the world and how we feel. Dopamine, adrenaline, serotonin, all of these hormones flood your system, and it's these neurochemicals that change the way you think, change the way you feel, and change what you do. And as leaders, I think we need to understand more about which are the neurochemicals that actually induce positive behaviors and which are the ones that induce negative behaviors, and indeed, therefore, what is it we as leaders should be doing that would be most likely to introduce positive neurochemicals into the brains of the people who follow us. And the reason is because there's absolutely no doubt that when people feel good about themselves, they perform better. When they're feeling positive, upbeat, confident, These are the things that enable them to deliver fantastic results. And when they are delivering great results, of course, as a leader, that's really, really good for us. Because we, as managers, like to deliver hard results. We like to deliver our numbers. But it is the soft issues, it is those emotional issues that determine whether or not we will deliver those hard results. And while we like hard results, I know from all the research I've done and that I've seen that managers are much, much less comfortable with those soft issues. And we're simply not getting the skill training to enable us to be better. So you remember I said that I was plagued by this question about why do smart leaders fail? And I eventually decided that I was going to go and answer that question. And I went out to interview over 80 leaders to talk to them about this concept of being inspiring and how to be motivating. Not just how to communicate well, but how to truly communicate in a way that inspires people and brings out the very best in them. And I got to speak to a fantastic array of leaders from a very wide range of companies, some of which you can see on the slide. Charities, banks, Formula One companies, airlines, security companies, you name it. I managed to get in front of all of these leaders and talk to them about what it takes to be inspiring, which was a truly amazing experience. And what I learned from those people, I taped every interview, and I then had those interviews transcribed, and all the words from all of those interviews amounted to something like 600,000 words. And I read and read and read and read and read this copy until I could see what these people were truly saying to me. And what they told me was fascinating, because I saw 12 things that they were talking about that caused me then to understand more about how you actually inspire the people around you. And I'm going to quickly share those 12 things with you now. These are set out in much more detail in the books, but I just wanted to give you a quick idea of what they're actually about. So the first 5, which are at the core of everything, is that you as a leader must be authentic. You've got to learn to be yourself better, and to do that, you've got to draw on your own passions to inspire others, because if you're not passionate, how can you expect other people to be passionate? So too often, however, I see managers being very muted in their response, trying to be objective, trying to be fair, trying to do things the right way. They mute their own personalities and they mute their own passion. And nothing inspires people more than your own passion. So it's critical that you are authentic and that you learn how to draw on your passion and your own values to inspire people. The second thing I found was that those leaders have a strong sense of purpose and a very clear set of values by which they live their lives. So strong that people can predict how they're going to behave because they are very consistent to not only their values, but the values of the organization. The other thing I saw was these leaders were very focused on the future, and they were able to paint pictures of the future. They were able to really visualize it and tell stories about the future in a way that made it alive for their followers. They could see the future and they could articulate the future, and it was that future that inspired people to try even harder. They spent a lot of time bringing the outside in, and what I mean by that is they would bring customer views into every team meeting, every situation. They would bring external stakeholder views into the organization all the time to make sure that the organization was in tune with all of the people that they were serving, and that every single decision was being made with customers, with external audiences in mind. And then many companies have engagement surveys, and driving engagement is often a key strategic goal of most organizations today. but not enough companies understand that it is really conversations that drive engagement. You as a leader, you show up through your conversations. People experience your leadership through conversations. And how good you are at those conversations will determine, to a very large extent, how good you are as a leader. The other principles that I came across was that you have to be audience-centric. And by that I mean you have to learn to understand your audience and understand what it is that they're thinking and feeling. Because until you address their concerns, until you deal with the issues that are of concern to them, they won't hear you. They will not listen to you. So you've got to learn to connect with audiences by being very, very clear about what's on their minds and showing that you recognize it. To do that, you have to be a fantastically good listener. And in one of my books, I have a survey to show what kind of listener you are by asking a series of questions which show whether or not you're a shallow listener, whether you are a confusing listener, whether you're the kind of listener who actually highly demotivates people by the things you do and the way you behave. Because the one thing that I'm really clear on is that listening can sometimes be the most inspiring act of leadership, and learning to be a great listener is hugely desirable. Many leaders worry about this because they say to me, well, I'm not here as a counselor. And I say, well, listening doesn't mean that you have to do what everyone is telling you. But if you want to show people that you respect them, if you want to make them feel valued, then you really do need to give them a damn good listening to. You have to have the courage of your convictions, and you have to stand up for your own point of view often, because it is in that moment of courage when you really do stand up for what you believe in and what you think is important that you truly show leadership. And surprisingly, I found that nearly all of the great leaders who truly were inspiring used storytelling a lot to help to motivate people. And so becoming a master storyteller, I think, is critical to leadership. Signaling is another key part of leadership, and that means making sure that your body language is in sync with your words. But it isn't just about your own body language and how you're appearing to people that matters, because people do watch you as a leader. They do scrutinize your every act, every behavior. But it's also in the things you do at the policy level. So if you say, for example, that bullying is not to be tolerated in this company, but you do nothing about the salesperson who's a brilliant salesperson but is also a bully, then the signal you're really sending to people is that bullying is acceptable provided you hit your numbers. So being conscious of the signals that you're really sending is a critical element to leadership. And I have found in many companies that leadership teams are simply not aware of the signals they're really sending into the organizations they lead. Your followers actually also expect you to be pretty good when you stand up on your feet on public platforms and talk with them. So being a good presenter, being a good deliverer of news and information to big groups of people is actually very, very important. And finally, the trait that I saw among these leaders that I thought was the ultimate in humility was that they never, ever, ever thought that they were good enough at communication. These were leaders who were at the end of their careers. They were very successful leaders, not only in the company they were now, but from previous companies. They were brilliant. But not one of them thought that they were actually a master of communication. And all of them thought that they still could do a great deal more to get better at communications. And by better, they meant more inspiring. They didn't mean more masterful in the way that they could actually stand up and be a showman on stage. What they meant was how they connected, how they inspired, how they were able to relate to people and bring people with them. That was what was mattered, not whether or not they had brilliant stagecraft. So I then took all of these principles and I did a huge surveying among 1,000 leaders. Actually, it's up to 2,000 now because I've just done a spate of more research to find out how leaders rated themselves against those principles. And what I found was that most leaders rated themselves highest on listening and having a strong conviction and a strong point of view, and that they were very audience-centric. In other words, they knew and understood their audiences, but rated themselves lowest on being consistent about delivering purpose and values, lowest on standing up and speaking in public, and also not being very visionary in terms of being able to talk about the future in very real ways. So armed with this information, I went to and spoke to lots of employees to find out how they rated their leaders on these principles. And not surprisingly, what we see is that the employees don't agree. The very things that most leaders say that they're not very good at are the things that employees want most of all. They absolutely need a sense of purpose and values. They want you to be good on their feet. They want to understand the future. And lots of research to show that the more you bring customer perspectives into the organization, the more, sometimes even bring customers into your teams and let your people talk to those customers, is highly motivating. But we don't do it enough. Engaged in conversations. People absolutely want more conversations with their leaders. Yes, they think you do send signals, but all the wrong ones. And the two things that most leaders think they're really good at are the things that employees think they're actually very poor at. And there are reasons for this. For example, with listening, most leaders think about when they think about whether they're a good listener, they think about whether they have good comprehension skills. But in fact, that doesn't matter to an employee. What matters to an employee is, does that employee feel like they've been listened to? Do they feel like you have respected their point of view and that you're interested in what they've got to say? And I'm afraid that most leaders are not very good at making people feel like they have been listened to. So this was the foundation of the first book that I wrote, The Language of Leaders, and led me to go on to actually write a second one, because another question started coming up too frequently for me to deal with, which was, how do you actually engage employees and deliver high performance? And so I wrote this guide for leaders called Communicate to Inspire, and it was a practical handbook on how do you really do those 12 things that I've spoken about brilliantly. And that book did really well, and it caused me to go around the world talking to leadership teams, to conferences, all about the research that I had done and the stories I'd heard from all of these different leaders. And then a third question came into the equation when I was taken one day by some friends of mine to enjoy a lunch at a restaurant in a jail. And the jail was HM Highdown, and it's a category B prison, which means quite serious crimes. And in this restaurant, I experienced a meal from prisoners that was amazing. If you look at this photograph, you might, as an eagle eye, understand that there's no alcohol in those glasses and that the cutlery is all plastic. Other than that, there was very little difference in this restaurant in the jail, which is called the Clink. And anyone can go to experience a meal at the Clink, and there are now 6 of these restaurants in different prisons around the UK. You can look it up on TripAdvisor and see the ratings. And they have fantastic ratings from visitors. When I was leaving, I asked the manager about why they were doing this in the prison, and he said, well, most prisoners, when prisoners left HM Highdown, within 3 months, 66% of those prisoners reoffended. So in fact, the prison wasn't a rehabilitation center, it was a college of crime. And among the people who did the Clink program, the reoffending rate had dropped right down to 6%. And what that meant for me was that these people had gained a sense of purpose that enabled them to change their lives, to transform their lives. And with that sense of purpose, they were able to redirect themselves, refocus themselves. And the question that I then started asking myself was, well, what is it about having a sense of purpose that enables people to perform so much better? And what I found was fascinating, because I spoke to neuroscientists, to psychologists, and I also went out and I interviewed another 30 CEOs, talking to them about how they had used purpose in their organizations to drive change and to improve performance. And what I found was hugely inspiring. And all of that caused me to do my own research among a further 1,800 managers and 2,200 employees on the subject of purpose and the behaviors of managers that are most inspiring, which then led to the publication of my third book, People with Purpose, which is the heart of today's webinar. And what it showed me through all this research was that there is no doubt anymore that purpose, companies who have a strong sense of purpose and who articulate that purpose broadly actually perform better and drive better profits. There is so much data now that proves this. And whether it's a company or a division of that company or a team in the company, teams, divisions, companies that have purpose, that have a strong set of values and have stretching goals, outperform everyone else. And it's all because of this issue of the neuroscience, which is at the heart of great performing teams. So when I had this question on my mind about the prisoners, how was it that they were able to transform their lives when so many other prisoners could not? I went and spoke to neuroscientists who told me some fascinating things. They said that, in pretty simple terms, that we really only have one of two emotional states. We either feel worthy or we feel unworthy. And how we feel is determined by whether we have a sense of belonging, a sense of importance, a sense of doing something that is important for others. And we also have two modes of operation. We either move towards reward or away from danger. This goes back to our reptilian brains. We either move away from danger, which could have been a saber-toothed tiger in the old days, but today it's more like a leader who is a bully, or a leader who is inconsistent, or big changes coming, or whatever it is that threatens us and makes us feel in danger. Or we move towards reward, which isn't only money, it's mastery, it's learning more, it's developing, it's a new challenge, it's feeling part of a team. And if we can move towards reward while also feeling worthy, then we will be much higher performing. If we have self-satisfaction, mastery, autonomy, and happiness, it's going to be a lot better than if we have uncertainty, toxicity, disrespect, and being made to feel unworthy. And this is exactly what I think you as a leader need to understand more. It's the brain science that makes the soft stuff make hard sense, because it is science and it's not soft stuff. So let's talk for a moment about why engagement really matters and why do engaged teams perform better. All the research, and there's a huge amount of research, shows that when employees are more inspired, they're more engaged. And when they're more engaged, the teams are more productive and perform better. Customer satisfaction levels are higher. Customer retention numbers are higher. Customer acquisition numbers are better. Rates of innovation are higher. There's less absenteeism. There's greater staff retention. health and safety statistics are always much better, and companies grow faster and are vastly more profitable. Now, there is absolutely no doubt about this anymore. These are proven over and over again in country after country, and I've seen so much research from so many different parts of the world that validate the fact that engaged teams perform better. And if you look at all of those criteria there, they are basically the KPIs of any management team. So armed with all of this, I then commissioned YouGov, the global online specialist research company, to do some research for me and to go and validate the principles from my first two books, and speak to 1,800 managers and to 2,200 employees. And I wanted to know from YouGov, what was it that really drives discretionary effort? And discretionary effort is that which is up to the employee to voluntarily give beyond the terms of their contract, because it's in discretionary effort that super performance resides. But the first step, before we could look at all that, was to understand what were the attributes of good, inspiring managers. And of course, I'd have a massive problem if managers and employees didn't actually agree. But the good news is that they very much did agree. And managers in this slide are in gray, and employees are in red in terms of their views. And you can see here that the single most important factor that makes a difference, and it's agreed by managers and employees as being important, is whether or not managers make their people feel important and appreciated. Highly emotional stuff, but the bedrock of high-performing teams. Do they feel worthy versus unworthy? Do they feel like they're moving towards reward versus away from danger? And to do all this, however, employees must feel that you as a leader are honest and sincere. Are you authentic? Because they'll see right through you if you're not. Do you live the values? Because again, they'll see if not. Do you understand their point of view? Do you have a commitment to the purpose of the organization? Do you define and regularly review goals? And one interesting statistic that came out of research about goal reviewing was that the more often you review goals of teams, the higher the performance and the higher the levels of engagement. Annual reviews, bad idea. Daily reviews, great idea. Because in the reviews come some really great conversations that drive up the engagement and inspiration levels of employees. So the next question was, well, if managers and employees truly agree that this is what's important, how well do people perform against these ones? And which of these are the most important attributes of all? And here's where YouGov, through statistic modeling, were able to tell me that these here are the most important things to remember. If you remember nothing else from today, these are the things you need to remember. The first fact is that most employees in that blue circle on the right bring with them their own motivation to a company. And it doesn't matter where they go, they are naturally enthusiastic, naturally committed, naturally hardworking people. And so 35% of your employees are going to be natural enthusiasts. All you can do with them is destroy that enthusiasm. But if you deliver these four things in the red boxes, as well as being authentic and principled, then you can drive up discretionary effort. And when you drive up discretionary effort, you can have a 27% uplift in performance and engagement. Now just imagine what a 27% uplift in performance would be to your own team. But it does mean you've got to focus on communicating the vision of your team or your division and constantly reviewing progress towards that vision, helping employees understand exactly how they contribute to it through what they do and how well they're doing it, giving them a voice by valuing their input and perspective, And to do all of that, you have to have really good conversational and oratory skills, underpinned on this platform of authenticity and living the values. So let's have a look at what the YouGov research was saying about how managers do against these different attributes. If making people feel respected was really important, then what do managers say? Well, 73% of managers say that they absolutely make their employees feel respected at work. Problem is, when you speak to employees, you get a very different view, because what they say, only 40% say that they agree, and over a quarter actively agree. And the problem here is that if people feel disrespected, the cost of disrespect is enormous. It's a vicious circle. Bosses either deliberately or inadvertently disrespectful to employees. Employees are disrespectful to each other and to customers. Customers then are disrespectful about you to their friends and associates. The reputational damage is huge, and there is a massive cost to the business. So this is a critical factor in success. Then I asked, so how do managers rate when it comes to showing that they care for people? Well, again, not great. As you see here, 93% of managers say that they care for their people, but only 50% of staff agree. Worse still, a quarter actively disagree, and almost another quarter are not convinced at all. So again, an area that we don't perform well at. What about whether or not managers are communicating the vision? Again, massive gaps. Management on the left-hand side there, 80% say they do, and only 49% of staff say they do. Worse, almost a third of employees disagree and say, actually, we don't get much visionary communication at all. What about talking about then how we're doing en route to our goals? Again, as you see here, management say to the tune of almost 80%, yep, we do that and we do that often. Sadly, employees don't agree. And here, a third don't agree that you do it enough with them. So this question about reviewing goals and talking about how we're doing and what we need to correct and what we need to do next is just not happening enough in organizations, and is a key area for us to concentrate on. What about whether you demonstrate the values of the organization? Again, a big gap between perceptions here of managers and employees. And again, another area that we just simply need to work harder at delivering. Because I really do believe that leadership moments occur in those conversations that you have with people. And when you're in conversation with them about improvement, about being agile, about making things better, that's when innovation happens. And people don't like the word change, but people love the word innovation. And if you can explain to me what the difference is, I'd really appreciate it. Finally, I think a critical area is this idea of putting purpose down on a page. Purpose on a page really matters, but purpose here is not just purpose, it's goals, values, and strategic priorities all in a page. Whether it's a small team, a big team, the critical factor I found from all the CEOs I interviewed was that when you can articulate your purpose and your values and your goals on a single page, and then get people in the organization to interpret those for themselves, that's when you create alignment, and that's when you create agility, and that's when you enable leadership everywhere in the organization. This next slide shows Napoleon at a famous battle in 1818 when he took on the might of the Prussian army. And it was really a battle of leadership philosophies, because Napoleon believed in delegating to his frontline generals, and the Prussians believed in a command and control style of leadership. And the Prussians had ruled Europe for years, so their style seemed to be right. The only problem was that in this particular battle, the Battle of Jena, it was in a valley, and a fog rolled into the valley, and then gun smoke from the cannons and muskets intensified the fog. And it's where the phrase "the fog of war" comes from, because what happened was the generals from the Prussian army on the hill could not see what was going on the battlefield, and therefore couldn't issue orders, whereas Napoleon's generals, in the heat of the battle, in the smoke and gunfire, were able to take command and make decisions and make things happen. And the result was that the small army of Napoleon defeated and routed the massive army of the Prussians and sent them into exile for more than a decade. And it came down to a simple concept, and that was that when people have a simple and clear purpose, they can give complex, intelligent decision-making and behaviors. When the rules and regulations become too complex, it actually gives rise to simple and stupid behavior. And this is a quite famous quote from D. Hock, who was the founder and former CEO of Visa International, and I think is a rule to live by. In my latest book, I have put together the framework that I think leaders should use to help to align vision. And it works like this. At the top there, True North, give a 10 to 20 year vision of what you're trying to achieve, underpinned by what is it that we're here to do. Purpose is about what we're here to do, not achieve profits. Profit is not a purpose. Profit is a measure of success. But what is it that we're here to do that makes a difference to other people? And then on the right-hand side there, over the next 3 years, what are we going to achieve en route to our long-term vision? And what strategic priorities do we need to deliver over those 3 years to change everything and enable us to reach the true north? And then distill through objectives and key result areas down to departments and down to individuals. And of course, over on the left there, what values are we going to operate by in this organization that we will live? Because that is what generates culture, and that's what delivers a sense of well-being and a sense of belonging for employees. Again, too much to go into in a short webinar, but something for you to think about if you manage to get hold of a copy of the book and then work through. And I have seen small teams of 5, 6 people doing this and transforming performance. And I've also seen divisions and whole global companies doing the same thing and enabling much more alignment and agility in their organizations. Because alignment is really crucial. As a leader, if you think about it, your story, my story, and our story as a team must link to the corporate story. And when all 3 of those stories are aligned, that's when you really do get super performance. Because the thing that we've always got to remember is that a critical thought is always about how you make me feel, how I feel about belonging, how I feel about my goals, or whether they connect to the corporate mission or whether I understand it, whether you show me that you care about me. All of that will determine how I behave, and how I behave will determine how well you do as a leader. Because inspiring leaders who live the values and provide purpose are leaders of better performing firms and companies with more highly engaged employees who deliver better service and productivity, who deliver more loyal clients, and more loyal clients bring more revenue. They are advocates, and therefore they bring you more clients. And so you generate huge intangible value and greater future value, all underpinned by inspiring leadership. I'm going to finish now with a thought, and this happened to me one month when I was invited to Cape Town in South Africa to give a keynote speech at a major leadership conference. 150 leaders from a global company had been brought from all over the world to Cape Town for this conference. And I was asked to go out and to give the keynote talk on the last of 3 days. And when I went to Cape Town and I was spending the first 2 days walking around the workshops of this conference, I heard leaders there talking about leadership and talking about leaders who they thought were inspiring. And they told me about the leaders that they found inspiring. In fact, they had pictures up on the walls, and the pictures were of people like Gandhi, Churchill, other fantastic, Kennedy, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela. And all of these leaders were leaders that they aspired to be like, which really, really bothered me, because I thought, well, I know for one thing for sure, I'll never be a leader of that caliber, and to try to be like that leader, I think, is going to result only in disappointment. So I spoke with most of these people. I said to them, tell me, what is it that, who was it in your career that you most benefited from? Who was the leader who most inspired you in your career, and how did they behave? And when I asked that question, everybody suddenly remembered a particular leader who had shown them how to behave, has shown them their belief in them, had shown them the potential they had, and who had unlocked that potential to enable them to really perform. And I said, well, why do you want to be like Mandela or Churchill when this is the kind of person who most inspired you? And led me to understand that truly the one thing we need to understand about being inspiring is that actually you shouldn't try to be inspiring. That's the wrong thought. The right thought is, how do I leave this person feeling more inspired? And if you have that thought in your head, you might just be able to deliver a high-performing team. So thank you very much, Margot. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and I'm ready for questions.
Thank you, Kevin. That was such an insightful presentation and some fantastic advice that you gave here. We've got lots of questions coming through, so we'll try and get through as many as possible in the next 10 minutes. So the first one I've got here is, what do you think the most common mistake that is made in communication from leaders to their team?
I think it is that leaders, often when thinking about communication, they sit down and they think about, what messages do I want to deliver to my team? And then they write out those messages, and then they go and perfectly broadcast those messages to the team. And the team won't hear the messages because the team don't feel that the leader really understands them, really connects with them. And the best leaders are those who start when they communicate by identifying with the team, showing them that they understand how they're feeling, where they're at, what they're worried about, before moving on to talking about what they want to talk about. And I think, people won't care about how much you know until they know how much you care. And so always start by making connections with people, by relating to them before. And if they show that you're prepared to listen to them and understand them, then you start what I call the listening contract, which is that if you listen to them, then they will listen to you. So stop thinking about broadcasting and start thinking more about conversations.
Great, thank you. So the next question is, how do you think the new flexible working environment has impacted leadership? And do you think there's some difficulties that come with this?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think in many ways there are very, very positive things about flexible working. And by that, I assume you mean remote working.
Yes, I think that's what's meant.
Yeah. So I'm sat here in my own office at my own house right now, and I know that I'm 10 times more productive in this office than I am when I'm in the actual office, because I don't have so many distractions. But face-to-face contact is really important, and creating a sense of community is a huge part of leadership. So how one does that, I think, still needs to be thought about a lot. And even if people do work remotely, finding ways to bring the team together, finding ways to create that sense of belonging is super critical. So how you think about it and what you do to overcome those issues is really important, because otherwise all we've got is individuals working remotely with no sense of team, who may be really productive but actually aren't very aligned. And in fact, what happens then is you're trying to lead individually and bilaterally lots of different people rather than trying to lead a team. So I think it has advantages but disadvantages, and leaders have to think very differently now in today's world about how they create that sense of common culture.
Thank you. The next question is, what do leaders think is the most important thing to remember when inspiring people?
That's an interesting one. I told you I did 130-odd CEO interviews, and at the end of every interview, I said to leaders, listen, I'm an old man now, and I can't remember anything that you've said when I get home. So tell me, what's the one thing that you would have me remember? And I then went through all my notes, and I looked at what was the one thing all those 130 leaders told me. And by far, the most common piece of advice was always, as a leader, be authentic, be yourself. Learn to unlock your passion and learn to be unashamed of showing that passion. And learn to understand what your own values are, articulate your own values to yourself, and then live those values and talk to those values, because it's that authenticity and being genuine that generates trust, and trust is essential to teams and teamwork and essential to leadership.
This next question might follow along the same lines as the previous one, but it is, what was the best advice that you received from a leader when you were starting out in your career?
Oh, I think there were two different ones. One was the answer's always in the numbers, which taught me to look for issues and trends in the numbers that weren't only about the numbers. It was about, okay, so these numbers are showing a decline. Why? What's happening? What are the behaviors that are causing these numbers to go down? Because it was the link between behaviors and numbers that was essential to me understanding more about leadership. If we want to achieve more profit, we've got to change people's behaviors. What do we want them doing more of? How do we generate those behaviors to drive the number up? So I think it was all about making the link between numbers and behaviors that was the single most important thing that I was told.
Great, thank you. A couple more. We think we've got time to get through. So the next one is, why is listening such an important skill?
Yeah, all the research shows and is really clear that when people feel valued, and this goes for personal relationships as much as work relationships and being a leader, being a good listener makes people feel like you really value their views and their opinions and trust and respect them. And unless you establish that level of trust, unless you make them feel good about themselves, then they cannot reciprocate those feelings to you. So being a good listener, and that isn't just about comprehension, remember, that is about how you make people feel. Whether you make people feel that you've given them a damn good listening to, that is the key to being a great listener. So when we talk about being a good listener, it's more about making people feel like you have listened to them and understood them and respected them than it is about understanding what they're saying. Because most leaders, to be honest, are pretty smart to get to where they are, and comprehension, therefore, isn't a problem. It's about how you leave people feeling.
Great. And so the last question for today is, why should I bother to be inspiring?
Yeah. Well, if you go back to that slide that I had about engagement, I can remember walking into teams in the companies I've worked in, and you could palpably feel the levels of engagement in teams. You will experience it when you go into a branch of a bank or a restaurant or anything, and you get treated by offhand staff who aren't terribly engaged and don't really care about what they're doing. And when you deal with people who are engaged, who are committed, who do give discretionary effort, the people who take and own problems and sort your problems out as a customer and who really care about you, you can feel it. And that drives more loyalty, it drives more revenue, and it reduces costs. Engagement delivers so many benefits that learning how to be engaging as a manager is probably, to me, the single most important thing that any manager can concentrate on today. And the only problem and challenge we've got is that I don't believe there's enough companies taking this very seriously and providing enough training. The Chartered Institute of Management has done surveys showing that they believe this issue of engagement or lack of engagement is costing the UK over £20 billion a year in lost GDP. And I actually fundamentally agree. So at a time when we're facing Brexit uncertainties and businesses have got so many challenges, the low-hanging fruit of productivity improvement is in being a better manager who can inspire people better, because that's how you get better results. So that's why I think it's so important.
Thank you, Kevin. That's been an absolutely fantastic presentation today, and I hope all the listeners have enjoyed it. Can I ask one final favour of our audience? Please rate today's webcast. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and will help to shape future webcasts that the Chartered Banker Institute provides. So once again, I would like to thank Kevin for taking the time to present to us today and thank our audience for joining us. Have a great day.